Students, we're going to finish up with chapter 5. This is part 3 of chapter 5, but just to review. In part 1, we read about the way in which Dr. Carson's classmates would be involved in capping, which is making fun of one another. And Dr. Carson at first didn't take part of that, but then he did choose to start participating in it and even forgot how it felt and how much it hurt to be made fun of himself because he became one of the top cappers, one of the top guys who could make fun of others. In part 2, we read about the way in which Dr. Carson really, really wanted to fit in. Well, he wanted to fit in part 1 also, but he wanted to fit in so badly, and he bothered his mom a lot about having the best clothes. And finally, she told him, if that's what's going to make you happy, then I'll get it. And she sacrificed her own needs to get him these really, really nice clothes. And he said that deep down, he still wasn't even happy. That's not where happiness comes from. And we also read about the way in which his grades dropped. He's in 10th grade at this point, and he had worked so hard to be near the top of his class, but he became infected with the disease that the other students had of wanting to be popular and have the latest style of clothes, and academics took a back burner, and his grades began to slip. And so my question is, what's going to happen next? Because he had this goal of wanting to be a doctor, and now this is the position in which he finds himself. Let's finish up chapter 5 here. When my mother was in the hospital to deliver me, she had her first contact with Seventh day Adventists. Okay, we are going through a flashback right now. He's no longer a 10th grade student. This is a flashback back to when he was delivered, okay? Mary Thomas was visiting in the hospital and started talking to her about Jesus Christ. Mother listened politely, but had little interest in what she had to say. Later, as I've already mentioned, Mother was so emotionally hurt that she checked herself into a mental hospital. At one point, she seriously considered committing suicide by saving up her daily medication and taking all of the pills at once. Then, one afternoon, a woman visited my mother in the hospital. She had met the woman once before, Mary Thomas. This quiet but zealous woman began talking to her about God. That in itself was nothing new. From the time she was a little girl in Tennessee, Mother had heard about God, yet Mary Thomas approached religion differently. She didn't try to force anything on Mother or tell her how sinful she was. Instead, Mary Thomas simply expressed her own beliefs and paused occasionally to read verses from the Bible that explained the basis of her faith. More important than her teaching, Mary genuinely cared about Mother, and right then, Mother needed someone to care. Even before the divorce, Mother was a desperate woman with 2 young children and no idea how to take care of them if things didn't work out. She was ostracized by many who felt she was unconventional. Ostracized means she was like cast out. She was talked about. They treated her poorly because she didn't do things like they did. Then along came Mary Thomas with what seemed like a single ray of hope. There is another source of strength, Sonia, the visitor said, and this strength can be yours. Those were exactly the words she needed as a stabilizing force in her life. Mother finally understood that she wasn't all alone in the world. Over a period of weeks, Mary went over the teachings of her church, and Mother slowly came to believe in a loving God who expresses that love through Jesus Christ. Day after day, Mary Thomas talked patiently with Mother, answering questions and listening to anything she wanted to say. Mother's 3rd grade education prevented her from reading most of the Bible passages, but her visitor didn't give up. She stayed at it, reading everything aloud. And through that woman's influence, my mother began to study and read for herself. Even though Mother could barely read, once she decided to learn, through hours of practice, she taught herself to read well. Friends, this is another indication of the character trait of Miss Sonia Carson. She is determined. Once she puts her mind to something, there's no stopping her. She was determined to get the house back, and she did. We find she was determined to learn how to read, and she did. I love the character traits of Sonia Carson. Mother started to read the Bible, often sounding out the words, sometimes still not understanding, but she persisted. That means she didn't give up. That was her determination at work. Eventually, she was able to read relatively sophisticated material. Aunt Jean and Uncle William, with whom we stayed after my parents' divorce, had become Adventists in Boston. With their encouragement, it wasn't long until Mother grew stronger in her beliefs. Never one to go into anything half-heartedly, she immediately became active and has remained a devout church member. And from the time of her own conversion, she started taking Curtis and me to church with her. The Adventist denomination is the only spiritual home I've ever known. So this was back when he was a young boy. And remember, we had read in a previous chapter how mom would go away for a period of time, and she was really checking herself into the mental institutions. And so that's when she was ended up developing her relationship with the Lord. So our flashback went from when Dr. Carson was a junior in high school, or a sophomore in high school, I'm sorry. We've gone all the way back to the time when he's a little boy. Now we're going to jump to when he is 12 years old, okay? When I was 12 and more mature, I realized that although I'd been emotionally touched at age 8 and even had been baptized, I hadn't understood exactly what being a Christian meant. By the time I was 12, we had moved and were attending the Sharon Seventh day Adventist Church in Inkster. After days of thinking about the matter, I spoke with Pastor Smith. Although I've been baptized, I said, I didn't really grasp the significance of what I was doing. You do understand now? Oh, yes, I'm 12 now, I said, and I believe in Jesus Christ. After all, Jesus was 12 when his parents first took him to the temple in Jerusalem. So I'd like to be baptized again because I understand and I'm ready now. Pastor Smith listened sympathetically, and having no problem with my request, he rebaptized me. Yet, in looking back, I'm not sure when I actually turned to God. Or perhaps it happened so gradually that I had no awareness of the progression. I do know that when I was 14, I finally understood how God can change us. It was at age 14 that I confronted the most severe personal problem of my life, one that almost ruined me forever. Now, I have a feeling that because we had been talking about how he wanted to fit in and be part of the crowd with these other boys, and the change he went through from being such a strong student to then his grades slipping, and then he said in order for us to understand that we had to go back to this part here, and he's sharing with us how he came to believe in Jesus Christ. But now he's saying that this he confronted one of the most severe personal problems of his life and it almost ruined him. So I predict that as we continue to read into the next chapter, we're going to find out how this wanting to fit in with everybody almost ruined his life. That is what I think we are going to cover in chapter 6.